Hi, it's Therese from Lost in Paper, and I'm here with my Back to Basics in card making, and today we're going to be talking about inks. There's basically two main styles of inks that I use. There are the dye inks and the pigment inks, and they both have advantages and disadvantages. So I want to start today by quickly explaining the main differences between the two inks. So the dye ink is exactly that, it's a dye. It actually dyes the paper, so it's absorbed into the paper. And it's a thin ink. So I'll just pop some of this on my stamp. And this is a Hero Arts, it's a shadow ink. It's a colour called Butter Bar. And one thing with these dye inks is something that took me a long time to get used to, is they actually don't stamp particularly even, but as they dry the colour evens out and is absorbed more into the paper, and you get a much better coverage. And as for the pigment ink, it's a much thicker ink, and because it's thicker, that means that it takes longer to dry. It actually sits on top of the paper, so one thing you do need to be aware of is not to touch it too quickly after you've stamped, because you can smudge your image. But a way of getting around that, if you're impatient like I am, then you can quickly heat set it with your heat tool. So one of the disadvantages of the dye inks is that they can stain your clear stamps. This is not a problem, it just comes down to personal preference if you don't like to work with clear stamps, because it won't affect the quality of your stamping at all. Just make sure that you do clean your stamps between use, because you can cross-contaminate colours from ink pads, especially if you're going from a darker ink pad to a lighter colour ink pad. And a good product that I've found, you can use this on all your stamps, is the Hero Arts Ultra Clean. So you can use this on any of your red rubber or clear, it doesn't matter, it won't harm your stamps at all. I also use baby wipes. So another thing to be aware of with the dye inks is that if you're using a lesser quality clear stamp, the ink may pool and you might get an uneven, blotchy sort of stamped image, especially if it's a solid image that you're trying to stamp. So one thing that you can do is re-stamp the image over top, and that might help with the blotchiness. You can also prime your stamp with some Versamark ink and then add the colour and then stamp. But I always like to test my stamps on a piece of scrap paper or cardstock before I actually commit to stamping on my project, if I'm not quite sure how it's going to look. So one of the reasons you might choose a pigment ink over a dye is you wanted to stamp on a coloured cardstock. It doesn't have to be a dark cardstock, but because the pigment ink sits on top, it's more visible and the dye ink is absorbed, so you won't be able to see that so clearly. So there are times when you're going to choose a specific ink because of what you're wanting to do in a project, and one of those times for me is if I'm wanting to Copic colour, and I would choose either a Memento or My Favourite Things dye ink, and I know that those colours are going to hold and my image is not going to smudge when I colour with my Copics. So if I'm going to watercolour, I like to use the Range Archival ink. It comes in heaps of different colours and it always stamps out really nicely. You could also use the StazOn. I'm not so keen on the StazOn, it smells too strong and it stains your stamps really badly, and it actually doesn't stamp very well, I don't think. But it is a handy ink to have if you wanted to stamp onto acetate or any slippery surface. Another option though, if you don't have a waterproof ink, is to use pigment ink, and the one I usually use is the VersaFine Onyx Black, and this is really good. You could just add some clear embossing powder, heat set it, and then you can watercolour your image. This is my favourite go-to ink for all my sentiments if I want them to be nice and crisp and black. I also use this ink for Prismacolouring and Inktense pencil colouring. The white ink that I have is the Colourbox Pigment Frost White, and I find that works reasonable. Generally I don't use a lot of white ink, they don't stamp really crisp, but it's good if you want that sort of subtle look in the background. If I want something to be white, I usually heat emboss it in white and then it comes out nice and crisp. So another ink I just wanted to quickly talk about was the Tim Holtz Distress ink. These are dye inks, but what's different about them is that they react with water. So you can get lots of different fun techniques from them, and you can even use them to watercolour. So the final ink pad I want to share with you is the Watermark ink pad, and this is called Versamark. You can also get a Versamarker, which is a pen version of the same ink, and this is a really slow drying pigment ink. It's clear so you can't see it, but if you do stamp it on coloured cardstock you can create a watermark effect. You can also use it for resist techniques and also heat embossing. So I just thought I'd quickly share with you how I keep track of the colours and the ink pads that I've got. I just created a binder, and you can actually download some of these templates from the internet. And with my distress inks I did both a distress kind of look and stamped out the image directly onto the paper, and that gives me an idea of what both versions will look like, and just simply made up a grid pattern for the other inks that I've got so I can actually look at exactly the colour they're going to stamp once they're dry, because especially with these Hero Arts inks, they dry much nicer than they stamp, if that makes sense. So that's exactly the colour they're going to look like when I stamp, and I can just refer to this. So to answer the million-dollar question, what ink should I buy? Well, for me that's a little bit of everything. I like to try out different techniques, and I use a lot of different colouring mediums, so it does pay for me to have a variety of inks in my stash. I've got to say though that I mostly do use the dye inks. So second to your stamps, inks are probably the next most expensive part of your stash, so it does pay to stop and think about what you're going to use them for and what kind of stamping you're going to be doing. But the good thing is that the inks do last such a long time, and you can actually buy refills for a lot of them, and these refills that you buy, you can actually use them for different techniques as well. If you're a little bit space limited, then a good option might be to buy the cubes of ink. These come in a heap of different colours and they're really affordable. So really it's just a matter of building your stash up over time, and it's something that's going to grow as your card making grows. So till next time, happy paper crafting. Bye.